So let's go through. I mean, I have obviously you and I have spoken a lot before. We've done a lot of interviews and we've talked a lot about these WrestleMania matches. But it's always nice to go down memory lane and relive your 14 matches at WrestleMania, which spanned from WrestleMania 2 to WrestleMania 26. A couple gaps in between there. But your journey at WrestleMania started at WrestleMania 2. It was the Battle Royal, had WWF at the time superstars, had NFL players, also had Andre the Giant, who ended up winning the Battle Royal. But you found yourself in the final two with Andre, which may have come as a surprise at the time because you were a tag team competitor and you weren't necessarily on this singles push. So how did that happen for you?
Well, it was all a change of plans. I was actually supposed to. I got the good news when we heard about WrestleMania that year. I got the big news. I was wrestling Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and I was really excited about that. And I really wanted to work with Ricky Steamboat just because he was such a great wrestler. And I thought, what a great opportunity! This is going to be my chance to, to show the world that I can actually be a real star wrestler. And it was a really big moment for me. And then at the last minute, they pulled it and said they changed the card and you're not working with Ricky Steamboat anymore, which turns out was a blessing because Hercules got to work with him instead. And he wrestled. I think their match was 30 seconds long or something like that. It was just I would have been really sad to there with a guy that like Ricky Steamboat and only get to do 30 seconds, which would have been disappointing for me anyway. But anyway, so they changed it and told me I was in the Battle Royal, and I took that really bad. I was like, that's a poor stage for me to show anybody that I can wrestle. Like I'm a technical kind of wrestler, and I can be a great wrestler in a lot of situations. The Battle Royal or the Royal Rumble, those kind of things, you kind of just get lost in the crowd, and nobody really does any brilliant wrestling because you can't fall or do a lot of stuff with so many bodies in the ring. So you're literally limited. I was always a guy that didn't really stand out in battle royals, or at least I didn't think I did. And I saw it as more of an opportunity for the bigger guys like Andre and Refrigerator and stuff like that to stand out. So I was not really looking forward to it, but I suggested to them when they told me I was in the Battle Royal, I said, why don't you let me and Jim the Anvil Neidhart be the last two guys in there with Andre? And then if you want, Andre can pick me up at the end of the Battle Royal and throw me over the top rope on top of Jim, and Jim would catch me. And I threw that out there as an idea. And funny enough, they went to Andre because Andre was not too excited about wrestling with football players. I mean, I don't think he had anything against them personally, but he just didn't want to be messing around with a lot of guys that didn't know how to wrestle for real and didn't understand the business. And he was just very touchy about that. So he kind of basically didn't want any of the football players to touch him at all or even lay a finger on him. And if you watch, very few of them do, if any of them touch him or go near him. And that was because he was not too happy about it. But when they came to him with the idea, he really liked the idea of me throwing me over the top on top of Jim. And so if Andre liked it, that's what we were doing. And so that's what we did that day. And it turned out to be an iconic moment for me.
What was WrestleMania like for a wrestler at the time? Obviously today, wrestlers aspire to work at WrestleMania. It's one of the pinnacles of their career. But during WrestleMania 2, like how important a moment was that for you at the time?
They were all really important, but I was always, I mean, in the early days, in those times, I mean, I was always, there was so many stars so many superstars that were getting the spotlights, like Andre and Hogan and Warrior and Macho Man and Jake Roberts and Steamboat. Like it would seem like when it came to myself, I had such a small screen like a small opportunity to stick my head out there and try to get some exposure or show somebody that I had the ability to be a important star in the show. But you often were disappointed with, like I said, with the Battle Royal. It was like nobody's gonna remember me after this Battle Royal, and it was kind of a poor stage for me to try to show different wrestling moves and holds and stuff which were my sort of qualities as a wrestler. but at the same time, to be in there with Andre was a huge honor. It's one of my favorite memories. Andre was a very special guy. Like he was, a lot of people might have met Andre in their lives and thought he wasn't a very nice guy or a very friendly guy, but he was actually a really good guy, and he just put up with so many fans for so many years that he didn't have much tolerance for them at the end of his career. Kind of like a big angry elephant. And but he was a real pro. I can say the few situations I had where I was in the ring with Andre, he was always an absolute professional, and he was really safe. We were talking about a guy that could kill you just about any time he wanted to, just by falling on you the wrong way. He could actually crush you and kill you, and he was so safe with so many wrestlers. I have always had a lot of respect for him. After I worked with him, I was like, he is a real serious athlete. He was a really skilled, quality guy that, when he did something like falling on top of you, he would measure and never hurt anybody that he worked with unless he wanted to hurt you. And he was Andre. I am so appreciative of all the memories I have from Andre. He was a real icon and a real one of a kind wrestler that they'll never see the likes of ever again.
Well, of course, the next year, Andre would main event WrestleMania with Hogan. You were there as well in a tag match. There's so many other WrestleMania matches to ask you about. The only thing I want to know is, a lot of fans also remember WrestleMania 3 for the carts that the wrestlers took to the ring, and also just the sheer magnitude of everything. So I'm wondering, does that, even though maybe the match wasn't the most memorable in your career, is there any memory from WrestleMania 3 that sticks out for you personally?
Yeah, was one of the hardest matches I ever had. There was a part where we had at the beginning of the match where me and Jim the Anvil got knocked out of the ring at the very beginning, I think just before the bell started. And the Bulldogs picked up Danny Davis, and they weren't big fans of Danny's, I don't think. And they purposely threw him as high in the air. They threw him out of the ring, but they threw him like about 10 feet in the air. And me and Jim Neidhart were supposed to catch him together on the floor. And what happened was, just as we were standing up, Jim was just getting up. He slipped and fell down on his butt. And I was all by myself, had to catch Danny Davis, who was like a skittish cat. Danny wasn't a real, experienced pro wrestler. He was mostly a referee and like a job guy. He wasn't used to a big stage as a wrestler. And he came down with his fingers sort of sticking out, and he fell on top of me with his finger in my eye socket and just about put my eye out. And I can't remember any of the whole match. I remember going 93,000 people. I remember standing on the apron going, I can't see any of them. Like all I did, I had tears in my eyes for the whole match. When I watched it back, which I watched it back just like 2 nights ago, and I enjoyed watching it, and I appreciated how hard it was for me to remember all of the moves and things that you could hardly tell that I was half blind for the whole match. And I literally, when I got home from that match, I couldn't see for almost 5 weeks at home. I had my eye teared and I basically just cried for about 5 weeks until it stopped tearing. Until it was a really painful, and that was my only 4 weeks I had off of that year. It was sort of just to ruin my whole time off. And it was just one of those small things that nobody noticed. But I mean, I almost got my eye poked out. In fact, my eye was black and blue, and the white of my eye was blood red for about 5 weeks. It was really one of the most serious injuries. I came very close to losing my eye completely.
Wow. It's crazy to think that like so many people's memories is seeing that crowd, and your memory of that WrestleMania is not being able to see due to that injury that could have been a lot more severe than it was.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Very true. And
go ahead.
Well, as after that, I mean, I think WrestleMania 4 and WrestleMania 5, they were both in Atlantic City. I don't know if there was anything really special about those.
The one thing I do want to mention is the trophy afterwards, and the reason is because a good friend of mine, and he's also refereed countless matches of yours, is Jimmy Corderas, who worked at WWE for 20 years, and he has a hilarious story about the trophy itself. So apparently, and this is his story, at rehearsals, the trophy was supposed to break, is what he tells me. But the trophy was way too loose, and so they gave it to an employee in Atlantic City to fix it, to make it a little bit more sturdy, so that when you smashed the trophy down, it was supposed to shatter into pieces. But this employee fastened it so tightly that it never broke. So that's his version of the story. I want to hear it from your end.
That's true. I think that's a true story. I also had the same thing happen with me with the King of the Ring, the very first one they ever had. It was more of a test model for the original first King of the Ring, but they had one a few months ahead of that where I got a big. And the Nasty Boys unscrewed all the bolts to the trophy, and I remember they handed it to me in the ring. This was in Providence, Rhode Island, and the whole trophy fell apart as they handed it to me, and it was a kind of a big farce, But they thought it was pretty funny, the Nasty Boys, but it didn't look very good for the company to have a trophy that fell apart when they handed it to me after everyone worked so hard for the whole night of the show. But I mean, it was kind of the same thing. Sometimes you gotta find the humor in this stuff.
You were really laying in those kicks too at WrestleMania 4, right? Like, you threw the trophy down and you were really like hitting that thing pretty hard.
Well, I was. It was a intense time for me. Like, I knew I was turning into they were going to turn me babyface, and they called me literally because WrestleMania was on a Sunday, so they called me I think Thursday night before I left on Friday. Vince McMahon goes, we have more fan mail for you than any other wrestler in the company, and we can't figure out why. And I said, I don't know why either. And he said, maybe it's the greasy hair or whatever. We joked about it, and he goes, that's why we're going to turn you babyface in the Battle Royal. We're going to give you this big push. And it was like he laid out this big plan for me, which in a lot of ways was the plan that eventually did happen. But for me back then, it never happened for a long time. He was going to give me this big push in singles, and I was going to be this big star, and you're going to be in all the main event matches. And I remember I went straight from that Royal Rumble with Bad News, where they put the trophy and all that. I went right to wrestling Bad News, but I never won a match for the next year. And they always go, well, you didn't have what it took, or you were lacking charisma. I always hear these criticisms about I had no charisma and I had no this and I had no that. But I always go, how do you have any charisma when you get this big push and you lose every match after that? Like, you just can't quite get the job done. It's you basically, I don't blame myself for not getting over. It's like they didn't get me over. And, the Battle Royal, I think probably with Bad News, the best thing I can remember about that WrestleMania was Donald Trump in the front row. I remember Donald Trump watching at both WrestleManias in Atlantic City. But I remember him watching from the front row, and somewhere in there I took a front turnbuckle. And he, you can see Donald Trump just totally marked out. He totally thought it was the most devastating thing he ever seen in his life. You can see his eyes and the way he shakes his head. And I remember after the Battle Royal when I met him, we took a picture with him in the back. In fact, Donald Trump was actually quite nice. So, I mean, he took a nice picture with me, and I could tell it was because he really liked my match. He liked the turnbuckle that I took.
This is the famous when you get launched into the turnbuckle and you take it on the chest.
Yeah, and he take one of those. I don't think he ever watched anyone do that before, but he's watching right in the front row. And if you ever watched that Battle Royal for that WrestleMania, you can see him. He totally got off on the front turnbuckle and was totally impressed. And when I met him in the back, I remember he shook my hand quite vigorously, like he loved my match, kind of thing. And then he offered to take a picture with me. And even the next year, I remember at the next WrestleMania when we fought Valentine and Honky Tonk, I remember Donald Trump asked me specifically, he said, how was the picture we took last year? And I hope it turned out, and I hope your dad liked it. And he was actually a very nice guy to be Donald Trump. This is a sidebar to the.
Well, you had a bunch of tag team matches. You were talking about possibly getting that singles run at some point. That didn't happen until WrestleMania 8, where you finally had the Intercontinental title match against Roddy Piper. And every time I talk to Hot Rod, may he rest in peace, we'd always talk about this match, and he looked back on it very fondly. He would always tell me that this was one of his favorite matches in his career. It was against one of his favorite opponents in his career. He enjoyed it very much. And it was I watched it last week. It was a very good match. I love the finish. Just tell me about putting this match together and just this spot in this moment at a big WrestleMania like WrestleMania 8, the Hoosier Dome with so many people in it. What was that memory like for you?
Oh, it was a really special time for me because I think I needed a Roddy Piper or somebody to kind of pull me up to the next level a little bit. I needed someone to help me a little bit. I was perfect, had done a good job, but I was kind of, I don't think the Mountie paid off big dividends for me and didn't do a lot for my stock. But Roddy was perfect for me. He was a veteran, big name wrestler that was gonna come back specifically. It was his idea to work with me, and he wanted to basically make me. He wanted to be that guy to build me up to the next level. Like, he believed in me and sort of saw an opportunity to give back, which I really love and appreciate about Roddy. Which when I look at some of the supposed big name great wrestlers from the 80s, like Jake Roberts, Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, they really never did anything for the next generation. They never made any other wrestlers. All they did was, they were holding the torch and they kind of stuck the torch in the ground. They never helped anyone else make it to the next level, like the guys that are going to fill your shoes as time goes on. And I always resented those guys, but Roddy was one of those guys that did say, like, I'm going to reach down and help the next generation by helping a Bret Hart or helping a Shawn Michaels or and that's why I really appreciate what Roddy did for me at that time by just agreeing to the match and to work with me at WrestleMania on such an iconic stage. But Roddy was also as close as you could get. He was probably my closest friend as a wrestler. And we were always really close all through the years. And he was kind of like my big brother on so many occasions, where he really gave me the advice that helped me climb the ladder from, like, with Jim the Anvil. Like, he was the first one that told me, he said, "You guys are not doing interviews." He goes, "You're never going to make any money if you don't get interviews." And I remember talking to him about it, and he said, "You need to go in and talk to Vince and tell him you need to do interviews," which is exactly what I did. And we got started getting interviews. And that's was a big step that I was missing, just little things like that. But he always gave me great advice, like in a big brother kind of way, about how to, climb the ladder there. And I was really so respectful of Roddy and everything he'd already done for me. And when we came to WrestleMania that year, it's funny, you get two wrestlers that are really close friends, and you sit down. And of course, Roddy and I really never ever wrestled before. I think we had a couple of situations where we were in the ring together, but we didn't really have a real serious match anywhere before. And that's not so easy when you've never worked with somebody. And Roddy was kind of a brawling style of wrestler, and not necessarily a technical babyface. But I think Roddy, that's what I understood from Roddy when I look back on it, is that he really wanted this match with me to show everybody just one time that he could really wrestle, that he was a real wrestler, not just a promo guy, and not just a brawler. And he wanted to tell a story. And that match I remember when I had that match with Roddy, we met up about 10 days or 2 weeks before the match, and we finally said, like, let's sit down and talk about the match. And I'd already been thinking about it. I already sort of formed this idea in my head how to have the match. And I was worried that Roddy was going to lay out a storyline for me that I didn't like, and then I would have to tell him I didn't like it, I wanted to do this instead, or that we would see the story differently. And that's always a big fear, because when you're good friends, you can upset your friendship with a disagreement like that. And it was an important time for me, and I was really sensitive about my career. And I just remember being quite concerned about it when I sat down with Roddy, and we were having dinner in a restaurant in I think it was New Brunswick. And I remember he just said, "This is what I think." And he started to lay out the match to me, and he talked for about 20 minutes. But the concept that he had was literally a complete, exactly same blueprint that I had. It was the exact same way I was going to start the match, the same way The only thing that I didn't have was the ending. At that time, I wouldn't be so presumptuous to assume I would tell Roddy what the ending was. I would have let him tell me what the ending was, and he already had. It was his ending, his idea, his concept. The whole idea with the bell, the sleeper hold, the backwards push off the turnbuckle, which was a very dangerous move. If you look at that move, I'm a 235-pound man, but Roddy's basically going to take 235 pounds full weight straight on his back of his neck, on his all that weight right on his face and on his back, and he totally did. That was his. He said, "Oh no, I'm braced for it." And but it was a very sacrificial thing for him to do to make me that way and to make me look so strong and to give me such a clear win. And that's what he wanted to do. And it was very genuine. I think the hugs and the pride we both had in that match. I think I gave Roddy that one sort of classic real wrestling match where he got to show people he could wrestle, and that was so important to him, which I don't know if I knew at the time it was that important, but I think over the years I realized how much it meant to him to do that. And for me, it was a critical moment where somebody reached up and really pulled me up a big step. I climbed a big step of the ladder that night when I defeated Roddy.
It's cool that you called that finish back with Steve Austin a couple years after that. A few years after that at Survivor Series, same finish except it was $1 Million Dream instead of the sleeper.
I think that it was that was an idea. We didn't really have much of an ending, and I just thought, he had that Ted DiBiase move that he did, the Cobra or whatever that he was putting on at the time, and so I thought, well, why don't you go for that, and then I can do the Roddy thing off the corner, and people might say it was kind of a rip-off of two different endings that are the same, but I always thought they were both two different, uniquely different situations. So that there's nothing wrong with doing the same move twice. Like you can do the same move again. You don't have to. It doesn't mean you can't ever use it again. This means you need to use it in the right situation.
WrestleMania 9 and 10. One thing that you've mentioned this a lot. You pride yourself on the ability to work with anybody, right? And I've heard you say that many times before, and it's true. You watch your matches, no matter what style. Roddy is a perfect example as a brawler, like you said, technical wrestler, big man. No matter who it is, Bret Hart will always pull out the best possible match. And now you're presented with Yokozuna, back-to-back WrestleManias. Let's focus on those two matches, even as a whole. Like, take me through that arc of working with Yokozuna, your philosophies on how to make that match interesting, and just generally like WrestleMania 9 versus WrestleMania 10, losing at one and winning at the other.
Well, the WrestleMania 9, I expected that I was going to win. I didn't know that I was going to lose that day, and they didn't tell me till literally the day before. It was quite a shock because they had told me when I had won the title, which was about 3 months before, that they were going to keep the title on me for a really long time. They were talking 5, 6, 7 years. They were, I only went on what they told me. So I was totally not prepared and braced in mind to lose so quickly. So I was really caught off guard by that and quite let down by it. It was really felt like part of me was like I thought I failed. Maybe I didn't do a good enough job as champion. They needed to go a different direction because I wasn't worthy of which, then sort of looking back on how hard I worked, I would realize that wasn't what it was. And I think it was more of a political thing with Hogan putting a lot of pressure on them to put the belt back on him. And it was it was done like almost overnight. Like the decision was made to beat me and to tear me down instead of keeping built up the way they were doing. And I would think that was all because of Hulk Hogan. I think that sacrifice, I was a sacrifice made to keep him in the company because they were worried to go to WWE. That's my fear, or not fear, but belief at the time. But I will say this much, that the match with Yoko, I laid out two specific pieces to the match, two segments, like part one and a part two, two smaller parts. Because I know Yoko, being 600 pounds, he really couldn't go a long match. Like we're not going to do like a half hour or an hour or anything in there. He was very. You had to protect Yoko when you wrestle a guy that big. You had to keep him from getting too tired, like where he gets too gassed, because then he can become quite dangerous. Where a guy that size can fall on you because he's too tired to get his leg up a certain way, or he could crush your face or your skull by falling on you wrong. Those are all real things that you worry about. And Yoko was I'll say this much about Yoko: he was one of the best athletes. Being 600 pounds, he was a beautiful athlete. I mean, he was so coordinated. He could dance and twirl and sing. He was a very different guy than you when you saw him in the dressing room. He was very funny and laid back and a very relaxed kind of guy, often rapping and stuff like that. But he was he could move like a cat in the ring, even though he was 600 pounds. And he was a real coordinated guy. Like if he dropped an elbow smash on you or an elbow drop on you, like he was a real safe, total pro in the ring. I could never get over, not just him, but all the Samoan wrestlers I ever worked with. They were all such good athletes. I mean, they could literally do anything, any move, and always do it right. And they were just special athletes to work with, all of them. And he was like that too. And match I had with Yoko at WrestleMania 9 was the best match. It would have been the best match Yoko ever had, and I believe it was the best match he ever had. He's a real wrestler. But I do know I had two parts to the match, and he basically forgot the whole second part of the match, and we got he went into the ending of the match like completely out of nowhere. And Mr. Fuji, of course, wasn't prepared because he wasn't the right time to go home yet. And anyway, Mr. Fuji had the powder he had to throw in my face. And Yoko, I had him in a sharpshooter, which was impossible to hold him in a sharpshooter. It was kind of funny when I think that I even had him in a sharpshooter. But it was actually kind of cool that I actually somehow got a version of the sharpshooter on him. And I had to hold his legs, which were impossible. Each leg weighs about 250 pounds. And I was holding these drumsticks and at the same time waiting for Fuji to delicately get this little piece of paper or Kleenex or whatever he had. They had the baby powder or whatever powder it was. And I remember it was like took it forever for him to get it and put it in his hand and throw it. But he threw it perfect. He got me right in the face. And of course, then he cost me the title. And Hulk Hogan won it about 2 minutes later. But I thought I was so mad about the match. Not that I lost, which I wasn't happy about either. But I had such a great match, and Yoko completely, I think because he got too tired, he completely cut the ending out. Like it was a beautiful 2 or 3 minute more part of the match that would have been just such a great little part of the story. And whenever I watched that back, I was going, we were telling a really good story, and I had really good intentions to make that a classic, really great match with Yoko, which, unfortunately it turned out it wasn't the big victory night for me that I thought it was going to be.
Why didn't Bret versus Hogan ever happen at that time?
Yeah, that was a shame. I think that was strictly politics. I think Hogan knew that someone like me could embarrass him in the ring or could really take the edge off him from a fan perspective because he was so limited as a wrestler and being so much bigger than me, like 6'8", wrestling a guy 6 foot. I mean, he's always going to be the overdog, and I was always going to be the underdog against Hulk Hogan, and that would have been too big of a thing. It would have been too. He couldn't make somebody. Hulk Hogan could never make another wrestler, and especially make another wrestler that actually might end up being bigger than him. He couldn't bear the thought of wrestling me and making me, so he completely buried the knife in me and made sure that he never worked with me and never. He made sure that they put me on the sidelines and that nobody ever watched Bret Hart and Hulk Hogan wrestle. And when we did wrestle, it was always kind of storyline where it was never really a match anyway.
Bret, you're being very generous with your time. I'll just ask one question for the other, because we got some really big WrestleManias coming up for you in your career. You've talked to me about WrestleMania 10, and I've always told you this. My favorite match of yours at WrestleMania is you and Owen. I love that match. I think it's one of my favorite. It's probably my favorite match of all time. And you've told the story a lot about how you had a match planned, but then the night before that match, you completely changed it. And one thing I haven't asked you, and I'm actually curious about, is what did the first version of the match look like?
Oh, the first version was it would have been a great babyface match.
So like Owens flying around, high spots.
High flying, a lot of diving, and a lot of stuff off the top. A lot of big moves with Owen. Because Owen did a lot of stuff where you could run up the middle of the ropes and stand on the top rope and do a back somersault, and a lot of really fancy, intricate moves that were really such a great stage to show Owen off as a great wrestler. I mean, that's what we were like. Okay, now we're going to show everybody what a great wrestler you are, and Owen was all for it. And we kind of mapped out this very intricate little match where Owen sort of outshining me over and over, and and the idea that this is what the story we need to tell. But as we got closer, I remember we really loved the match, and we, like I said, we had a match together. We had, I believe, 2 tag matches where Owen was tagged up with, might have been 1, 2, 3 Kid. I can't remember, but I think I was teamed up with Scott Hall, funny enough. But it was some kind of a tag match. I know Scott Hall was one of the guys in it. It might have been Sean for that matter. But I know we were in tag matches where we got to kind of experiment with each other. And finally, it was the first time we ever worked with each other other than, we did have one match somewhere, I think, in WWF when he wrestled as not Owen Hart, but somebody else. But anyway, we never really had a chance to ever really know each other's style. I'd worked with a lot of Japanese wrestlers and could kind of get an idea on Owen's style. I guess I had one match with him when he took somebody's place one time. But we put in too many nice moves in the match. And I remember thinking about that Owen was not mean enough to be a bad guy, and that this thing would backfire if they didn't accept Owen as a villain. They could very well turn him babyface. Like if he keeps doing drop kicks and really nice moves, they're not going to get mad at him. They're going to start cheering for him. And I remember I just realized that the way this story, if they react the wrong way, the audience and the fans in general, even on TV, they're going to start to really love Owen's wrestling skills. And it's going to take away from him being a villain. And they're going to start wanting to cheer him because he's a good wrestler, and B, he's been a long time for a guy like him to never get a chance. And so people would get behind him because it's like nice to get behind an underdog kind of thing. So I called Owen up on I think it was on a Thursday night again before we left on the Friday. And we had this match all locked in our head. We practiced it and went over stuff even at my dad's house. And, we had the whole thing perfected. And I remember I called him up. I said, meet me up at Dad's house. We got to change everything. And he met me up at Dad's house and came in. And
what was his reaction to that when you said we got to change everything?
He listened to what I said. I said, you're going to end up being babyface. And that's not what we want. I mean, I actually think, talking to you right now, that the match we had set up might have been a better match than we ever had again. Like we never had a stage to have that match ever again. Like a technical, almost a babyface type match. And I remember I said, Owen, I said, you're going to be a bad guy for like 4, 5, 6, 7 years. This is a whole run for a long time. You can't be a bad guy for a couple of weeks and then turn back into a good guy because we do this wrong. Your money you're going to make in the big break is as a bad guy, not a good guy, and you got to do this right. And we thought about it some more, and then if you watch that match, we took out all the a lot of the cute babyface moves that were beautiful moves, and Owen was a great babyface, air like a high flyer. And we took all those moves out and we changed it to put in moves where he's biting my fingers and trying to bend my neck, break my fingers and bend them and stuff. Holds. He's biting my hand. He's pulling my hair. I think there was 2 ball shots where he nut shotted me twice and took me out with that. He did every dirty possible trick that you could. We tried to think of as many nasty, things that people would have contempt for him, and it worked. I remember at the end when he's standing outside the ring at the end of the night when they're all carrying me around it when I won the title from Yoko. I remember Owen came out to the walkway or the entranceway, and it was how they went off the air for the pay-per-view. But you could tell Owen was so excited. He was the whole crowd's booing him and throwing stuff at him, and it's like he totally understood everything I told him, like why we changed it and what we needed to do to make him a villain. And I think he when he was standing there, he was going, "That's what we needed to do." And they're booing me like crazy, and they hated Owen for a long time, and that's what was the what we had in mind. So it was a good idea what we did.
My one of my favorite details in that match is right at the beginning. You both lock up, you push away. He celebrates like he won the Super Bowl. And on commentary, Vince McMahon turns to Jerry Lawler and says, "Is that some sort of victory?" And Jerry Lawler goes, "That's clearly an advantage for Owen Hart." It was like, what a perfect way to start the match. Celebrate like you won the Super Bowl off of pushback on a lockup.
The thing about that, the match was such a great match, and we loved it so much. But it was really the first time we ever worked together. And people always say, they love that match. It's one of the, the iconic WrestleMania matches that people bring up the most to me. And the truth is that all the matches we had after that only got better. I wish that WWE had taped or filmed some of the matches we had a month later, 2 months later, or 3 months later, because we wrestled for almost 6 months straight. But we got better and better and better starting from that match, which was a great blueprint. And we just tightened it up and got a little bit more comfortable with each other's styles. Owen did a lot of stuff where you had to catch him and be in the right place at the right time to hold him or support him for a move. Where you didn't really learn all that or know that first day, but by the third or fourth day or the fifth day or the 10th day, it was like it just got so much smoother and so much tighter. And I know fans that saw the Heart Attack tour, which was the big WrestleMania tour right after WrestleMania all over Europe. I still remember the match that I had with Owen in England and Germany and Italy and places like that were just so special because they were so much even better than the WrestleMania 10 match. They really got better and better and better.
Wow. Well, one match you don't call special is what happened at the next WrestleMania against Bob Backlund. In fact, in your book, you call this the worst pay-per-view match ever that you've had. Do you still agree with that assessment? And why didn't it just click? I mean, Bob Backlund, he's a former longtime champion. What made that match so bad?
No offense to Bob, and it's no disrespect to him. He was a great wrestler, and he was a certain wrestler, a certain style from a certain era. But he was a wrestler's wrestler, and I was enough of a wrestler's wrestler that I could wrestle that style. I'd wrestled, I could wrestle a guy like Bob Backlund, or at least I could try. And what the problem was that it was the match. It wasn't the opponent. I don't blame Bob Backlund for any of it. It was just a really lousy storyline. People think a submission match is easier to have, maybe. I don't know if they think it's easier, but whenever you lose the pinfall concept, like there's no pinfalls. You're limited to only submissions, which are often boring. And so it's like I were telling Vince, I said, this match it's like wrestling a guy handcuffed. Like you've taken away pinfalls, so we have even less chance of making an exciting match. But just to put boring headlocks and sleeper holds and bear hugs and full Nelsons and whatever, figure four and a sharpshooter. There wasn't that many submission holds that I thought would keep everyone's attention to have a great match. I thought it was such a stupid idea. In fact, I think it still is a stupid idea, the submission matches. But anyway, I just felt like it handcuffed us both. And the fact that they had Roddy in there with the microphone and Roddy was sticking the microphone in our faces, and Roddy had never done that either. I think it was the idea, thought might be a good way to do it, but it really did what it did. I remember he would reach down and stick the mic in my face and go, "What do you say?" And what do you it just seemed like I remember like having the match with Bob, and I could hear the crowd laughing. And I thought in the ring, as I was struggling through this poorly thought out match, I remember going, nobody laughs at a Bret Hart match. Like I'm a serious technical wrestler. I'm like the champion, ex-champion, and I really prided myself on my work. And when I could hear the crowd snickering at how much of a farce the match was in the ring, I remember being embarrassed by it and going, I told them this was going to stink, and it started to really stink bad. I always thought, no disrespect to Bob, but we did the best we could with a really poorly thought out idea, which takes us to the next year, or actually not the next, 2 years later, when I worked with Steve Austin again. It's a submission match, and it's the exact same feeling. I go into WrestleMania 13 with Steve Austin. I'm not really excited about the match at all. I think we're being rushed together again. We've already wrestled at Survivor Series. And the fact that it's a submission match is going to make it that much harder. I know I got a sharpshooter, and that's about it, really. Maybe a few other holds that I can put a figure four on, a few different things. But we don't really – Steve's not a submission wrestler. He didn't have any submission holds. And I remember it was going to be a disaster. And funny enough, we went there with both kind of dragging our feet to the match. And when we were sitting there thinking about the match that day, sitting at ringside – we came up with the match that I think was the greatest match I ever had. And that's funny how the one concept would give me the worst match I ever had at a pay-per-view. And then the match with Steve Austin, it was just, it all came out. It made sense. We made sense of their bad idea. You always pinfalls and things like that to make the match more exciting. And the submission match eliminates that.
You talk about this match at length with Steve in an interview on the WWE Network. I find that interesting, though. So you think that match at 13 is your best match in your entire career, or just WrestleMania?
I think my best match in my career is there's a lot of matches I had that were never on TV. Okay. Like I wrestled Dynamite Kid in Regina, Saskatchewan in Stampede Wrestling. That I would put that match up with any match that I ever had, So, I mean, but for the ones where I can actually put on and show on screen and show somebody, I mean, whenever I want to show somebody, especially if they're not familiar with wrestling, I can always get their attention with the WrestleMania 13 match. I think it delivers such great psychology, and what I love about that match is that it's kind of like a UFC fight. It's a really brutal, violent kind of match that's really intense and comes across as very real. And I was just watching it a few days ago with somebody, and it's like I walk out to the ring, I'm the babyface, everyone loves me, they're cheering for me, I'm going to fix this guy that's been with me for the last 4 months. He's double crossed me, just cost me the Royal Rumble. I won the Royal Rumble a week before, or 2 weeks before, couple weeks before that. And he came in and threw me out. Anyway, it was a great heat spot for him. But we had great heat going into the match. And I felt the same thing, that we were handcuffed with this submission concept again. Like, why would you limit us to just submissions? Because now we have no pinfalls, no false finishes, you're just making it harder for us. And they did. That is harder. A submission match is harder. But, when me and Steve got to the ring that day and we started talking about the match, we started to find this thread of reality or psychology to it. Like, he knew, Steve was one of the only guys that was aware of the fact that him and I were going to basically switch places. I was going to turn into a bad guy the very next night on Raw. And he was not necessarily overnight, but in the next 6 months to a year was going to slowly evolve into being the babyface of the company. And we were the first two people to talk about it that morning. And I was glad for him. And I wanted to pass the torch back to Steve anyway. And so I remember I said, this is what I think. And we started talking about the match. And, I compared it to a school fight, like that I was the popular kind of guy in the school, and everybody liked me, and I was on the football team. And Steve Austin was like this badass that just moved to school, and he's more of a trouble. He's badass. Everyone's scared of him, and everyone can see this sort of fight happening before it happens. And now it's the day that they're going to fight after school on the bike racks out at the side. And that's how I said, this is how I see the match. I said, this is how it has the same vibe to it as that does. And then that's where it's like we started to tell this story, talking to each other in the ring. We mapped out this great back and forth struggle, and just everything in the match was such a. I always compare it to, I think as far as UFC or WWE matches, it's the UFC match. It's the one that you watch that's quite violent, quite real, and it's funny how the bad guy gets turned into the good guy because you feel sorry for him for getting beat up so bad. And that's kind of what happened to make Steve, that he was such a fighter and didn't want to quit. And then he did quit. He lost. It's kind of like, I remember making the comparison to Steve that day in the ring. I said, when I put the sharpshooter on him and he couldn't get out of it, and he almost did, like he almost tipped me out of it, which was all planned. But it's a lot like that scene in Cuckoo's Nest when Jack comes and he's got to pick that sink up and try to throw it through the window in the middle of the movie or whatever. And he doesn't do it. He can't do it. But he tries so hard to do it. And everyone I remember saying to Steve, I said, when you try to kick out of the sharpshooter, but you can't get out of it, and then I put it back on you, that's when they're going to hate me. They'll be so mad that I beat you, even though all shitty things you did will, won't affect you. They're going to go with Steve, even though I deserve to be cheered, and they should be cheering me. They're going to go with the bad guy. It was a great twist of psychology, and it's kind of hard to explain in short, like in talking to somebody. But if I had it on behind me, there's so many things you can, like Steve, there's one part where he kicks me right in the crotch, and the way I sold it and the way it looked so nasty and so real. And it just, you can still do that and they're still going to cheer him, even though I was like totally the blue-eyed babyface good guy. I just loved how it played with everyone's emotions. It made you cheer the shark in Jaws, which is kind of weird.
Other than the Montreal Screwjob, would you say that match is the one that you get asked about the most from fans?
Lately, I think because it's started to become iconic now, where it's like, I think it's Steve's best match, and it's really a good story for anybody that's a wrestling fan to say, I'm going to show you one wrestling match. Someone that's never watched a wrestling match, or someone that's never been a fan of wrestling. You can say, just watch this one match and tell me if you like wrestling. And you can put that match on, and everyone, without someone that doesn't know much about it, would find it really fascinating to see such a great physical fight and a violent fight, such a great story, and to know that no animals were harmed in the making of this movie. I mean, it was one of the easiest matches and most fun matches I ever had. I remember I came back. I've always been proud of it because it was so easy, and Steve was so trusting, and really he followed my lead all the way through it, and it was a great match.
One question I have about WrestleMania 12. You've talked about that one a lot as well. That's the Iron Man match with Shawn Michaels. It ends up being a 1-0 score in overtime. Was that always the plan, that you would go 60 minutes, no falls at all, it would go to overtime, and it would be just one fall, and that's it?
Yeah, that was pretty much the plan right from the get-go. That was Pat Patterson's idea. And I was kind of, to be honest, I thought one fall for 60 minutes would be too slow and would make it harder. Like, it'd be more fun to have more falls to keep people's interest. But in the end, Pat wanted that idea, and Vince, they loved that idea, and I think it was a good idea. And I don't suggest that maybe I was right in the idea. I had a different idea in mind, with like five or six. But just I had more falls because I was worried about not being able to keep everyone's attention for 60 minutes with no falls. Like 60 minutes with no falls can be kind of boring if you're, and being WrestleMania and leading into it. I mean, going before the match ever happened, you always think, what happens if they start booing at the 25-minute mark and they start, everyone's falling asleep going into the 40-minute mark. And it's like, you just can't get anyone off their ass because they've seen so many wrestling matches through the course of the night that they're too tired. And this match doesn't have the spunk in it to get their attention anymore. It can, a long match, like an Iron Man match, can be very boring and not work very well if you're not careful, if you don't have two really good wrestlers. I always say, like, I always think my favorite matches for all my WrestleManias are the ones with like the one with Steve Austin, the one with Shawn Michaels. You know, they were just, the one with Shawn was such a hard, it was two wrestlers, two great professional wrestlers in their prime of their lives, trying their hardest to deliver the best match of their careers. In a lot of ways, it was two wrestlers trying to outdo each other for 60 minutes. It was like a competition of two pros giving 100%. And I didn't realize that it was going to be that kind of almost like a marathon. Like, I knew it was going to be a marathon, but it was a real challenge. Like, Shawn, he came with a full tank of gas and he was going to try to run me into the ground. And I came with a full tank of gas and I wasn't going to let him. And we gave a unbelievable, I think in a lot of ways that match is just so special just for the workload that we brought to that match. And the fact it was, I really think it was Shawn's finest hour. Shawn was a great wrestler, you know, one of the greatest that I ever stepped in the ring with. And he was one of the greatest athletes to ever step in the ring. And I was really proud of that match. I still am. I think it was one of those situations where if you were a wrestling fan and you didn't know all the ins and outs of it like they do today, I mean, it came across as a very real match. And I think it was I could say it was a nod or a tip of the hat to all the great wrestlers that probably Shawn watched and worked with as growing up. He watched a lot of great wrestlers and worked with a lot of great wrestlers. And like, I'm talking like Harley Race and Nick Bockwinkel and just some of these great wrestlers. I think I always had so many of those great wrestlers always tell me they loved that match the most, and because it was a wrestler's wrestling match. And the Iron Man match with Shawn was probably one of the for sure, it was the hardest one single match I ever had, and I felt like I got run over by a train for about 2 months. But it was such hard work and such a beautiful performance, and I thought it was a beautiful story. I sometimes love the matches that I lost the most. Like, I love the Wembley with Bulldog, and I always loved the drama of losing and the emotion that you get from the sympathy of everyone being shocked by the fact that you lost. And same with the Iron Man match with Shawn. I always thought it was very dramatic and it was very powerful when you watched it, and when it happened, you could feel it in your heart. It was one of those ones that I think was going to stick with you forever. If you were a wrestling fan, you'd always remember, because a lot of people, I remember the match with Shawn of really, on my promos, sounded so convincing in that I was not going to lose to Shawn Michaels, and I was going to prove it to everybody. And I just sounded and was so convincing and so determined. And then to lose like clear right in the middle of the ring, 1, 2, 3, can add so much emotion to it that I knew that when I lost that I was as important as I was when I was winning. Like that actually my stock never went down. It stayed up exactly where I was as important as I ever was. And that's what you want to do.
Let's end on WrestleMania 26, which when I look back on it now, Bret, like, you had been going through a lot at that time, right? A few years ago, you had the stroke. You had to, your career was cut short due to what happened with Goldberg in the ring in WCW. There was also the storyline, right, with Mr. McMahon, the whole Montreal screw job, everything. So now you're in the ring at WrestleMania 26, and even aside from the match itself, I'm just wondering, like, is that sort of like a poetic moment for you to just even be able to have that moment at WrestleMania after all that you'd been through the last previous few years?
Oh, for sure. I think it was the most. It was the most powerful WrestleMania of all of them, and it wasn't WrestleMania for anyone else. It was a WrestleMania for me. It was about me, and I can remember, like I had so much, I did, like, having suffered a stroke, and I think I carried around a lot of ill will and bad feelings, and I was mad at I wouldn't say mad at the world, because I wasn't mad at the world, but I was mad at WWE. I was mad at Vince. I was mad at Shawn. I was mad at Earl Hebner. I was mad at Goldberg and WCW for dropping the ball and for getting hurt, and I had a lot of angst in me, and of course Owen's tragic death and all that, a lot of weight on my back. And I compare it to carrying around a lot of rocks. I carried around this big stack of rocks every day. I got up every day, and I carried those rocks around for quite a few years. And it was always tied in with Vince McMahon, and it was just I just know I carried a lot of bitterness inside it. And sometimes I wonder if I had the stroke because I carried around so much bitterness towards Vince McMahon and WWF. And so in saying all that, I think when I had the stroke and I was in the hospital, and I realized that I would maybe never walk again, I was going to be in a wheelchair, and that my life was a mess, and I was really in a kind of a train wreck state, mentally, emotionally, physically. I couldn't believe what a hard change of life I had, from sort of being the king of the world one year to being in a wheelchair and unable to even turn my hand over. So it was very emotional, a very tough time for me. But I do remember Vince McMahon called me when I was in the hospital. In the early days of the first day, I think they put a phone in my hospital room. I was in the hospital for 3 months. But he called me up and he gave me a nice pep talk. And I remember we kind of broke the ice. It was very emotional for me, very, very, I think, therapeutic. It was uplifting. Vince gave me a good pep talk too, which he also gave me when I had prostate cancer a few years ago. He was, funny enough, one of the first guys I called to tell him I was going in for surgery. And again, he gave me a good pep talk that day. But Vince and me have always had our issues in life, and we'll always be tied in with the screw job and what happened there. And it was an unfortunate circumstance, I think, for both of us, but I think they were wrong and I was right. That's just my opinion. But anyway, I always had a father-son relationship with Vince, and I really, when he called me, for some reason, all the hate that we had between us, and I think it was pretty mutual, kind of melted away, and it ended up like two once upon a time friends in a very kind of tough moment, kind of being there for each other. And we talked that day about the Hall of Fame, and then if I ever got nominated, I told him I would go. I said I felt like I earned it and I deserved it. And if he ever asked me to go, I'd go. And he told me that would happen someday. And we talked about other things, and he was kind of positive. And I said, someday we should talk about what happened, because, I think you got a different version than me of what really happened. And, later on we did end up talking, and we kind of, to a certain degree, kind of buried the hatchet, and that opened the door for the match in Phoenix. But what really happened, I think, was I think I carried around the ill will of all the stuff that happened with WWE, and realized that I didn't like the ending that we had, and I hated the fact that that's all I ever really heard about was like, so what do you think of WWF now, or what do you think of Shawn Michaels, or what do you think of? It was always such a scab to pull off, all the time. And I realized in going through that and having suffered the stroke that I was going to take a negative and turn it into a positive. And I didn't want to carry around this big bag of rocks anymore. And so I made a point of agreed to do the WrestleMania thing with Vince, and I wanted to bury the hatchet with Shawn for real. We'd never met each other since the screw job, and there was a lot of really serious ill will. And so I wanted to bury the hatchet with Shawn, because Shawn and me, once upon a time, were very good friends. Like I was really good friends with Shawn, and I think I was a very positive influence on him, and was somebody that he was. I think he probably felt regret that our friendship and our relationship had soured to the point that it had that day. And I don't know, I just knew, I just remember going, I instigated a lot of that with Shawn too. It wasn't just Shawn poking me in the eye. It was me poking Shawn in the eye. And, it was both of us were guilty of, unprofessional conduct sometimes in our interviews and things that we did. But, I'm at least man enough to say that, we both probably would have been better off burying the hatchet and making friends, and finding a better way to spend our energy than hating each other, or being afraid of, Shawn being afraid of bumping into me somewhere and it's going to be a cat fight. We just, I think in the end, it was so good to do that. And it was a lesson to everybody. I think, people have differences, and that was a huge, real conflict, that whole screw job in the Montreal, and what happened, and how they treated me, and what their intentions were, and how corrupt and dishonest they were leading into all that, and deceptive and purposely misleading me about things. And I was just so glad to sweep all that off and have something fresh and new to do, and just tell a different story. Even I knew that I was never going to have a great wrestling match ever again. I remember when I had my stroke and I was in the wheelchair, I remember, I'll never ever walk out in front of the crowd, do my big wave, and have my jacket on and the people cheering. That's never going to ever happen again. And then when I did do the WrestleMania that day, I remember standing on the stage at the big football stadium in Arizona there, and looking at the crowd and going, I remember thinking that this would never happen. But here it is, it's happening. I'm actually walking out and getting cheered. And then Vince came out. I always loved the WrestleMania match with Vince, because it was, it was not a great technical match, but it was still entertaining, and it brought the whole Hart family together. We all kind of united together that day and buried the hatchet in a lot of ways. For a lot of people in my family, there was still a lot of ill will towards WWE and the company and Vince, and all related to what happened to Owen and Martha. And, for me, it was a day to kind of sweep all that to the side and move forward and build a better relationship. And I think that's what we did. I have a pretty good relationship with WWE today.